When your own child tells you to get out of the house you built with your bare hands, you don't cry, you break in silence. I still remember that night like it was etched on my soul. The rain was falling in sheets, drumming against the mansion's glass walls like a warning I refused to hear. My name is Margaret Hawley, and once upon a time, people called me the Golden Widow, a millionaire entrepreneur who turned grief into gold. But that night, as I stood on my own marble driveway, clutching a single suitcase while my daughter slammed the door behind me, I realized titles mean nothing when your own blood betrays you. The house I built, the one with my late husband's initials carved into the oak doors, no longer belonged to me. At least, not in spirit. My daughter Vanessa and her slick-tongued boyfriend Ethan had claimed it as their kingdom. And I was just a ghost haunting their comfort. "Mom, you need to understand," Vanessa had said that evening, her voice trembling but her eyes hard. "You're getting old. You don't know how to manage things anymore. Ethan's helping me take control before you ruin everything." Her words sliced through me like glass. I wanted to scream that I was the one who made everything. I was the one who worked double shifts, started my company from scratch, and paid for her college tuition. I wanted to remind her that she was raised in luxury because I had refused to give up after her father's death. But when I looked at her, I didn't see my daughter. I saw a stranger wearing her face. Ethan stood beside her, leaning casually against the wall in that smug way of his, one hand in his pocket, the other wrapped around Vanessa's waist. "It's better this way, Margaret," he said, smirking. "You need rest. A smaller place. A quieter life. A quieter life." That's what they call banishment now. When I refused to sign the property transfer papers, they called the police. My own daughter did. The young officer who arrived seemed confused when he saw me, standing in my silk robe, barefoot, tears streaking my makeup. "Ma'am, maybe it's best if you just step out for the night," he said gently. I laughed then, a dry, hollow sound that didn't belong to me anymore. I stepped out. That's how a millionaire became homeless in one night. I remember sitting in my car, a silver Mercedes that suddenly felt like a coffin, and staring at the house. Every window glowed with warm light. Every room still smelled like my perfume. Every corner still held my memories. I'd spent 40 years building that home piece by piece. And yet, it only took one signature, one betrayal, to take it away. I drove aimlessly that night. The rain blurred the world outside my windshield. For a while, I thought about crashing the car, ending the pain in one quiet final act. But then I saw something, a reflection of my younger self in the glass. The woman who once rose from poverty to power. The woman who refused to be defined by loss. I couldn't let her die, not like this. I pulled over near an old park, turned off the engine, and cried until dawn. My phone kept lighting up with missed calls, not from Vanessa, but from my lawyer, from my company's manager, from people who depended on me. I didn't answer. I didn't have the strength. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Margaret Hawley, the powerhouse. I was just a mother broken by her own child. The next morning, the world felt different, colder, quieter, crueler. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed puffy eyes and a streak of white in my hair I'd never noticed before. I was 68 years old, and suddenly I felt all of it. I checked my bank accounts, frozen. My company shares, temporarily managed by Vanessa. The lawyer's voice trembled when he told me, "She has power of attorney. Mrs. Hawley, you signed it 2 years ago after your surgery. It gives her partial control." So that's how they did it. Not in a single night, but over years of quiet manipulation. Ethan had been whispering poison into her ear, convincing her that I was unstable, that my business decisions were reckless, that I was too old to run my empire. I had no idea that while I was building my legacy, my daughter was building a trap. I spent the next few nights sleeping in my car, parking behind gas stations and pretending everything was fine. I wore sunglasses to hide my swollen eyes, kept my jewelry locked in the glove compartment, and prayed no one would recognize me. Because how do you explain to the world that the woman who once owned half the neighborhood now lives in her own vehicle? Still, even in the darkness, a small flame refused to die. I thought of my late husband, William, how he used to call me his hurricane. "No one can stop you, Maggie," he'd say, smiling. "Not even the world itself." And so, on the fourth night, as I watched the sunrise through my car window, I made a promise. I would rise again. I would rebuild not just my life, but my soul. And when the time was right, I would make my daughter see what she had done. I turned the key in the ignition, whispered to myself, "This isn't the end," and drove toward a future that had no shape yet. But I would give it one. People think money protects you from heartbreak. But I built my empire on love, not luck, and love is the one currency that can ruin you. When I close my eyes, I can still see the beginning, the woman I used to be before greed and betrayal twisted everything. I wasn't born rich. I was born in a one-bedroom house that leaked when it rained. My father fixed cars, my mother scrubbed floors. We didn't have much, but we had pride, and that was enough to make me dream big. At 19, I met William Hawley, a tall, kind man with calloused hands and a smile that could silence the world. He worked at a construction company and loved building things. He once told me, "Maggie, someday I'll build you a house so beautiful, even the sun will stop to look at it." He kept that promise. We married young. We didn't have money, but we had each other, and somehow that made everything feel limitless. William encouraged me to finish college while he worked overtime. I studied finance, worked part-time at a diner, and dreamed of creating something that would outlive both of us. Our daughter, Vanessa, was born on a cold December morning. She was tiny, red-faced, and screaming, but when I held her, I felt the kind of love that rewrites your purpose. I wanted her to have everything I never did. And for a long time, she did. After college, I started small, selling homemade skincare products from our kitchen. William helped me design the packaging, and together we delivered orders in his old truck. People laughed when I told them I'd turn it into a company one day. "Dream smaller, Maggie," they said. But I didn't know how. By the time Vanessa turned 10, Hawley Naturals was a recognized name across 3 states. My creams and oils were in boutique stores and on magazine shelves. I hired women who were struggling like I once did, single mothers, widows, women starting over. I didn't just build a business. I built a sisterhood. And through it all, William stood by me, my anchor, my believer. We finally built our dream house when I was 45, the same mansion from which I would one day be thrown out. Every brick, every window, every inch of that home carried a memory. The marble staircase William insisted on. The piano room I designed for Vanessa, though she never learned to play. The garden where we planted white roses, his favorite, but dreams have expiration dates. William died suddenly when Vanessa was 21. A heart attack, out of nowhere. One minute he was laughing over dinner, the next he was gone. I remember collapsing beside his body, screaming his name until my throat bled. The world went quiet after that, too quiet. I buried my best friend, my partner, my reason to smile. For months I couldn't work. I couldn't even step into our office without breaking down. Vanessa, who had just finished college, started spending more time away, parties, friends, anything to forget the grief. I didn't blame her. We both were drowning, just in different ways, but while grief froze me, it also sharpened me. I poured all my pain into work. I expanded the company, invested in new products, opened factories. In 5 years, Hawley Naturals became a multi-million-dollar brand. Reporters called me the Iron Widow, a woman who turned loss into legacy. What they didn't know was that I cried every night in the same bed. William died, and Vanessa grew distant. She didn't want to join the company or live the life I had built for her. "I want freedom, Mom," she'd say. "I don't want to live in your shadow." I thought she was just young and lost, the way I once was. I supported her travels, her ventures, even her impulsive spending. Maybe I gave her too much. Maybe I loved her too gently when I should have taught her how to fight for what she wanted. And then came Ethan. He was charming, too charming. The kind of man who looks you in the eye and makes you forget to blink. Vanessa met him at a charity gala I hosted. He was 10 years older than her, sharp, ambitious. Always in expensive suits, but never clear about what he actually did for a living. He called himself an investor. I called him a liar the first time I shook his hand. Something about him felt off. He smiled too much. He flattered too easily. And worst of all, Vanessa was blind to all of it. Within months, he moved into the mansion. I remember the first morning I found him at my breakfast table, eating strawberries from my crystal bowl as if he owned the place. I didn't like it. But I didn't want to start a war with my only daughter, at first. He was polite, helpful even. He offered to modernize my company's operations, talked about digital expansion and new investments. I let him look at a few financial reports, trusting that Vanessa's judgment was better than my instincts. That was my first mistake. The changes were small at first: a new account manager, a few signature authorizations, then a temporary power of attorney after my surgery. Ethan convinced Vanessa it was for my safety. "You don't want to burden your mom with stress," he told her. And she, my sweet but naive girl, believed him. I didn't realize I was slowly giving away my empire and my home piece by piece. Still, for a while, life seemed normal. Dinners, holidays, charity events, smiles for the cameras, even if mine never reached my eyes. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, Ethan treated Vanessa like a queen. She glowed around him. Maybe that's what I wanted to see, her happiness, even if it came at my expense. But love, when poisoned, doesn't kill instantly. It seeps in slowly, through signed papers, whispered lies, and the small silences you ignore until it's too late. I should have seen the signs. The secret phone calls. The sudden interest in my financial records. The way Vanessa flinched when I asked about my own investments. But I was blinded by love for my daughter, for the illusion of family. And so, when the night of betrayal finally came, it wasn't a thunderbolt. It was a slow storm I had been walking toward my whole life. Looking back now, I understand something I didn't then. Wealth can build walls, but not protection. It can buy comfort, but not loyalty. And sometimes the people you love most are the ones who know exactly where to strike hardest. Some betrayals are silent. Others come with the sound of a slammed door and the echo of your own child's voice telling you to leave.
It was a Friday evening. The sun was melting into gold behind the garden, and the house was unusually quiet. Too quiet. I'd spent the day reviewing old financial records in my study, trying to trace what had been siphoned out of my accounts. The deeper I dug, the more my stomach twisted. Almost half of my company's reserves, gone. Transferred to shell corporations under different names. Ethan's fingerprints were everywhere. I confronted Vanessa that evening, shaking but composed. She was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone, a glass of wine in hand. Ethan was beside her, lounging on the sofa, like he'd paid for it. "Vanessa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk. Right now." She sighed, not with guilt, but irritation. "Mom, can this wait? We're in the middle of something." "No, it can't," I said, stepping closer. I checked the accounts. I know what you've been doing. Her fingers froze on the glass. Ethan looked up slowly, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. Doing? Mrs. Hale, I think you're confused. Vanessa and I are managing your assets responsibly. Managing? I snapped. You've drained my company. You've been transferring money behind my back. Vanessa stood abruptly, her voice sharp. Stop accusing him. He's helping me fix the mess you made. The mess I made? I could barely breathe. Vanessa, that company built your life. It paid for your education, your clothes, your vacations. And it trapped me, she interrupted, her eyes blazing. Do you have any idea what it's like to live in your shadow, Mom? Everyone comparing me to you. I'm 32 years old, and people still call me Margaret Hale's daughter, like I don't even have a name of my own. Her words hit harder than I expected. Here it was, years of resentment finally spilling out. I stepped closer, my voice trembling. Everything I did was for you. Every sacrifice, every late night. Exactly, she screamed. You never let me live my own life. You controlled everything, my choices, my friends, even my career. Ethan helped me see that I'll never be free until I stop living under your rules. Ethan stood, placing a hand on her shoulder, like a puppeteer steadying his strings. She's right. Margaret, maybe it's time you step back. You've done enough. Step back? I whispered. From my own life? From my home? Vanessa crossed her arms. It's not just your home anymore. You transferred ownership after your surgery, remember? Half of it's in my name. My blood turned to ice. You mean half was, until you gave it all to him. Ethan's smirk faded for a moment. I knew then that I was right. I had uncovered the final piece of their deceit. I want you out, I said, my voice low and shaking with rage. Both of you, tonight. Vanessa's eyes widened. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious. This is my house. My husband built it with his hands. You think I'll let a stranger and my own daughter steal it from me? Ethan stepped forward, his face darkening. Careful, Margaret. That stranger is the man your daughter loves. And legally, we're well within our rights. Something in me snapped. Years of grief, exhaustion, and betrayal crashed all at once. I slapped him. Hard. The sound echoed through the room. For a moment, everything froze. Vanessa gasped. Ethan's eyes filled with cold fury. Then he smiled, a slow, venomous smile. That's assault, Mrs. Hale. Maybe we should call the police. Vanessa hesitated, trembling, torn between love and loyalty. I looked at her. Really looked. The girl who once cried when she scraped her knee, who used to draw hearts for me on Mother's Day, was gone. In her place stood a woman I didn't recognize, hardened, hollow, and lost. Vanessa, I whispered, don't do this. But she didn't move. She took Ethan's hand and nodded. That's when he reached for his phone. Within half an hour, 2 police officers arrived. Polite, sympathetic, but firm. They said they'd received a call about a domestic dispute. I stood there, numb, as Ethan explained that I had grown unstable and that Vanessa feared for her safety. Ma'am, one officer said softly, maybe it's best if you leave for the night. Things seemed tense. The night, I laughed bitterly. You mean forever? Vanessa turned her face away as tears slid down my cheeks. Mom, please don't make this harder. Just go. We'll sort things out later. Later. There was no later. I walked upstairs in silence, the officers following a few steps behind. I packed one suitcase, just one. A few clothes, a framed photo of William, my wedding ring, and the last bit of pride I had left. When I came back down, Ethan was standing by the door, holding it open with a smug grin. "Goodbye, Mrs. Hale," he said softly. "Take care of yourself." Vanessa didn't look at me. She stood by the staircase, staring at the floor, clutching Ethan's arm like it was her lifeline. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her and ask her if she remembered the nights I stayed up when she was sick, the sacrifices I made to give her the world. But no words came. Only silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. I stepped outside. The cold air slapped my face, and rain began to fall. Hard, relentless, mocking. The officers watched quietly as I dragged my suitcase to my car. One of them helped me open the trunk. His eyes were kind. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he whispered. I nodded. "So am I." When I drove away that night, I didn't look back. I couldn't. The woman who had entered that house decades ago, full of love, hope, and dreams, had just been buried beneath its walls. And yet, even as tears blurred the road ahead, I felt something strange. A spark deep inside me. A whisper that said, "They can take your home, but not your fire." I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not stay broken for long, because even in ruin, I was still Margaret Hale. And Margaret Hale always rose again. When you lose everything, you discover who you really are. Not the woman in designer clothes, but the one crying behind the steering wheel. For the first few nights after I was thrown out, I couldn't accept it was real. I kept thinking Vanessa would call, that she'd come to her senses, drive to wherever I was, and say, "Mum, I made a terrible mistake." But the phone never rang. My Mercedes came my home. I parked it near the city park because the security cameras made me feel a little safer. Every night, I folded my coat into a pillow, rested my head against the cold window, and stared at the stars, the same stars I used to watch from my mansion's balcony. Funny how they look exactly the same, no matter how far you fall. During the day, I cleaned myself up in public restrooms, ate cheap sandwiches from gas stations, and told myself it was temporary. I couldn't tell anyone, not my employees, not my friends, not even my lawyer. The shame was unbearable. The media loved stories about fallen millionaires, and I refused to be their next headline. On the third morning, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, wrinkled, tired, with streaks of grey that hadn't been there before. I whispered to the woman staring back at me, Margaret Hale, millionaire entrepreneur, sleeping in her car. How poetic. But pain can be a brutal teacher. Every humiliation, every cold night, stripped me of something. My pride, my vanity, my illusions. What it couldn't take was my will. On the fourth night, I met Nora. She was about 50, thin as a twig, with a messy bun, and bright eyes that didn't match her worn clothes. She knocked on my car window around midnight and said, "You shouldn't sleep here, love. Cops make rounds. Come with me." Normally, I'd have been terrified, but something about her felt genuine. She led me to an old community shelter 2 blocks away. It was small, but clean, run by volunteers. The woman in charge, Martha, handed me a blanket and said softly, "You're safe here, ma'am. No questions asked." That night, for the first time in days, I slept on an actual bed. It wasn't silk, but it was warm. And when I woke up to the smell of coffee and heard laughter from women who'd lost far more than I had, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: humility. Over the next week, I helped around the shelter quietly. I scrubbed floors, served meals, folded clothes. No one recognized me. To them, I was just Maggie, another lost soul finding her way. I never told them who I really was, not yet. It felt freeing to just be human again, without the weight of wealth or reputation. One evening, as we sat together eating soup, Nora said, "You've got nice hands, Maggie. Not like the rest of us. You used to work fancy, didn't you?" I smiled faintly. "Something like that." She winked. "Whatever it was, you'll find it again. Women like you don't stay down for long." Her words lit a spark inside me. That night, I lay awake thinking. I still had something Ethan couldn't steal: my mind, my business instincts, my experience. I'd built an empire from scratch once. I could do it again. Maybe not as big, but enough to stand tall. So the next morning, I borrowed Martha's old laptop and used the shelter's Wi-Fi. I started checking on the market, my old business contacts, anything that could help me rebuild. I discovered that while Ethan had taken most of my assets, a few smaller accounts in my name were still untouched. About $60,000 total, hidden in forgotten investments. To most people, that wouldn't last a year. But to me, it was enough. Enough to start again. I spent the next few weeks carefully planning. I rented a small studio apartment under my middle name, Margaret Lynn. It was barely more than a room with a kitchenette, but after sleeping in a car, it felt like paradise. I promised Martha I'd come back to donate when I could. She hugged me and said, "You will, Maggie. I can see it in your eyes." The first thing I did after moving in was buy a notebook. On the first page, I wrote 3 words in bold letters: rebuild, reclaim, rise. I started a new venture, quietly, anonymously. I registered a small consulting firm that helps struggling small businesses with branding and finance. No one knew who I was. I used my initials, ML Consulting. Within 3 months, I had my first few clients. Within 6, I was earning enough to stand tall again. But success wasn't the same this time. It wasn't about luxury anymore. It was about dignity, independence, healing, and strangely, I felt more alive than I had in years. Still, some nights were hard. I'd lie in bed and wonder if Vanessa ever thought about me, if she felt even an ounce of guilt, if she slept soundly in the house that used to be my world. But grief had turned into something else: resolve. I wasn't done. Not until I got my company back. Not until I looked her in the eye and showed her the woman she tried to destroy still stood, stronger, wiser, unbreakable. So I called my lawyer, the one man who had always been loyal, strong David Kramer. He nearly dropped the phone when he heard my voice. Margaret, good Lord, where have you been? Everyone thought you'd vanished. Bring me a phone. Not vanished, I said calmly. Just preparing. He sighed. Vanessa and Ethan have been making moves, Margaret. They're selling shares, merging subsidiaries. I know, I interrupted. And I'm going to stop them. Quietly, legally, completely. He hesitated. You mean to take back the company? No, I said, a small smile forming. I mean to take everything they think they own. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not the broken mother, not the forgotten woman, but the hurricane my husband once saw in me. And this time, the storm was coming, not for survival, but for justice. Revenge wasn't my goal. Redemption was. But sometimes the two wear the same perfume. 6 months after being thrown out of my own house, I stood in a modest office on the 12th floor of a downtown building. Nothing fancy, just 3 desks, a printer, and a breathtaking view of the city skyline I once ruled. It wasn't much, but it was mine. ML Consulting was growing faster than I dared hope. My clients, small businesses gasping for survival, found my advice uncanny. Of course, they didn't know I had spent 40 years navigating corporate jungles. They just thought I was a brilliant old woman with mysterious experience. Each contract I signed was a quiet act of defiance, a whisper to the world that Margaret Hale wasn't finished. Meanwhile, David, my lawyer, became my secret weapon. He helped me trace every illegal move Ethan and Vanessa had made. Turns out they weren't as clever as they thought. Ethan had been siphoning money from the main company accounts to a shell corporation under Vanessa's name, Vanelli Holdings. The irony was cruel. My own daughter stealing from my empire with my name hidden inside hers. Can we prove it? I asked. Oh, we can prove it, David said with a smirk. But are you sure you want to go public? It'll be messy. Public humiliation wasn't my style. I didn't want headlines. I wanted control. Quiet, devastating control. So I began phase 1, the silent buyback. Through David, I used ML Consulting's profits to acquire small shares of my old company, Hale International, under different shell names. Tiny pieces, invisible in the grand scheme. Within 4 months, I owned 12% of my own company again. Not enough to dominate, but enough to stir panic once the truth came out. During that time, I'd often walk past the old Hale mansion, now Vanessa's home. I'd stand across the street, hidden under a wide-brimmed hat, and watch the lights glowing inside. One evening, I saw them, Vanessa and Ethan, laughing at the dining table where I once sat with her father. The image burned into me like a hot blade, but instead of crying, I whispered, "Keep laughing, darling. The bill is coming." Months turned into a year. My company flourished. Clients doubled, then trickled. I hired young entrepreneurs from broken backgrounds, women who'd been told they were too old, too inexperienced, too past their prime. I taught them what the world had taught me. Resilience is the richest currency of all. They began calling me the comeback queen. I didn't correct them. The name fit. One morning, David walked into my office, holding a thick folder. "It's time," he said. He dropped the file on my desk. Inside were documents proving financial misconduct, insider trading, and corporate fraud under Ethan's management. Each one signed by Vanessa as co-owner. Once this leaks, David said, they'll lose everything. I stared at the papers for a long time. A part of me hesitated. She was still my daughter, after all. A little girl who once drew me Mother's Day cards with hearts and glitter glue. The one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, whispering, "Don't let the lightning get me, Mama." But that little girl was gone, and I had a storm of my own now. "Do it," I said. David nodded. "As you wish, Margaret." The news broke 3 days later. Every financial outlet ran the headline. Hale International Scandal, CEO and partner under investigation for corporate fraud. The fallout was immediate. Investors pulled out. The board called an emergency meeting. Ethan vanished from the public eye. And Vanessa, my daughter, was left to face the media alone. When I saw her on TV, pale and shaking, I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, pity, but most of all, closure. A week later, I received a call. Unknown number. I answered. "Mum," her voice cracked. "They froze my accounts. I can't access anything. They're saying I might go to prison. Please, help me." There it was, the cry of desperation I'd once begged to hear. But the silence that followed wasn't cruel. It was peaceful. "Vanessa," I said softly, "when you threw me out, do you remember what I said?" She sniffled. "You said I'd regret it." I exhaled slowly. "I didn't mean financially." There was a long pause. Then a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mom. It wasn't enough to erase the betrayal, but it was enough to heal something broken inside me." "I'll help you," I said finally. "Not because you deserve it, but because I can't let hatred define me." Within weeks, the legal storm settled. I quietly acquired controlling shares of Hale International, this time openly. The board reinstated me as CEO. When I walked into that building again, the one I'd built brick by brick, the staff erupted into applause. Some cried. I stood before them and said, "I lost everything once. Money, family, dignity. But I learned that wealth isn't what you own. It's what you overcome." That night, I visited the shelter where I'd once slept. I donated $1 million to rebuild it, renamed it the Phoenix House, because that's what I had become. As for Vanessa, I set boundaries. I helped her pay her legal fees, but refused to bring her back into my business. She needed to rebuild her own life, like I had. Months later, she came to visit me, timid, thinner, changed. We sat in the garden of my new home, drinking tea under the same stars I once cried beneath. "I didn't know you had it in you," she said quietly. I smiled. "You never knew who your mother really was." She looked down, ashamed. "Can you ever forgive me?" I reached across the table and took her trembling hand. "I already did, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting." When she left that night, I watched her go with a heavy heart, but also with pride. Maybe she'd finally understand the lessons life had taught me the hardest way possible. I stood there alone, the cool breeze brushing my face, and whispered to myself. They called me weak. They called me finished, but I was just waiting for my next beginning. And under that vast night sky, I smiled, because I wasn't the woman who lost her fortune anymore. I was the woman who rebuilt it, one heartbreak, one lesson, one victory at a time. I lost my home, my family, and my name, only to find my soul again. 2 years have passed since that night I sat in my car, clutching my last coat and wondering how the world had become so cruel. Now, when I walk through the marble halls of Hale International, people rise from their desks and greet me with smiles, not fear. They don't see an old woman past her prime. They see the founder who came back from the ashes. But behind the tailored suits and polished speeches, I am still that woman who once slept in a shelter. Every morning, before I step into my office, I whisper the same words to myself. Stay humble. Stay human. Remember where you've been. After reclaiming the company, I could have rebuilt my fortune and vanished into luxury again. But that wasn't enough anymore. I wanted meaning. I wanted impact. So I started the Phoenix Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to helping women over 50 restart their lives. Women abandoned by families, cheated by partners, dismissed by society. We provided housing, small business loans, and mentorship programs. I personally taught the financial literacy workshops every month, sitting among them with my sleeves rolled up. At first, they didn't believe I was the Margaret Hale. They'd say, "You can't be her. The Margaret Hale wears diamonds and lives in penthouses." And I'd laugh. Not anymore. These days, I wear purpose. The foundation grew quickly. Stories poured in. Widows, divorcees, single mothers, each one carrying a quiet fire inside her. I saw myself in them. I saw the pain, the pride, the resilience. One afternoon, after a workshop, a woman named Clara came up to me in tears. "You don't know what this means," she said. "My daughter threw me out when I lost my job. I thought my life was over, but now I have hope again." I hugged her tightly, whispering, "It's never over, darling. Sometimes it's just beginning. Sometimes it's just beginning." That night, alone in my study, the one I'd written in when I had nothing, on the first page were still the 3 words that saved me. Rebuild, reclaim, rise. I smiled and added a 4th one beneath them. Reach. Reach. Because what good is rising if you don't lift others with you? My relationship with Vanessa slowly began to heal, though it would never be what it once was. She visited often, helping at the foundation, quietly rebuilding her own path. Sometimes we'd sit in silence, sipping tea, saying nothing. But there was peace, fragile, but real. One evening, she brought her teenage daughter, my granddaughter, Leela, to visit me. Leela had never really known me before. Her parents had kept her away during those dark years. She looked around my office, eyes wide. "Grandma, did you really lose everything once?" I nodded. "Everything but my heart." "And you got it all back?" I smiled. "No, sweetheart. I built something better." She thought for a moment, then said softly, "I want to be like you someday. That single sentence meant more than any award or check I'd ever received. Years went by. The Phoenix Foundation expanded into multiple cities. My story was told in newspapers, podcasts, and documentaries, though I never enjoyed the spotlight. The real joy came from the letters I received. Women writing, "Because of you, I didn't give up." One winter morning, as I walked through the Foundation's newest center, a volunteer asked if I'd like to name one of the buildings after myself. I shook my head. "No," I said. "Name it after the women who refused to break." So we called it the House of the Unbroken. I began to realize that legacy isn't about how people remember your wealth. It's about how they remember your kindness. On my 75th birthday, surrounded by the women and children my work had helped, they surprised me with a plaque. It read, "To Margaret Hale, the woman who turned betrayal into a blueprint for hope." Tears filled my eyes as they sang "Happy Birthday." For a moment, I thought back to the lonely nights in my car, how impossible this day had once seemed. When the celebration ended, I sat quietly in my office, watching the sunset paint the sky gold. The city below buzzed with life, and I thought of every version of myself I had been. The wife, the mother, the businesswoman, the outcast, the survivor, the leader. Each version had fought to keep me alive long enough to become this one. Picked up my pen and wrote my final message, not for the world, but for my granddaughter, to read when I'm gone. My dearest Leela, life will test you, break you, and rebuild you 1,000 times. Don't fear the breaking. It's how you discover your strength. Never let money define your worth. I had millions and felt empty. I had nothing and found my soul. If the world ever turns its back on you, remember, there's a shelter somewhere waiting for your courage to walk through its doors. And when you rise again, because you will, make sure you reach back and pull another woman up with you. That's how we heal the world. Love, always. Grandma Margaret. The last line I'll ever write in this story of my life is this: I was betrayed by blood, abandoned by love, and forgotten by fame. But the moment I forgave, I became eternal. The world may remember me as a millionaire, a CEO, or a philanthropist, but I know the truth. I was and will always be the woman who refused to be erased.